Hey Lou, it's Groundhog Day.
It is Groundhog
It
Day.
is Groundhog Day.
Yeah,
I actually send out Groundhog Day cards.
oh, great.
Uh, I bet not too many people can say that, but it is
Right.
Groundhog Day, and I guess Phil
Phil said 6 more weeks.
6 more weeks. He
He,
does
he
that
was
every
lying. He
year.
was lying. He was
You,
lying.
no, yeah, I don't
Well,
think so.
well, the Leominster mayor, who has his flamingo predict, he said no.
I'll go with the flamingo. I like the
Well, I'm
flamingo.
hoping. I'm hoping for that the flamingo is right. But yeah. So here we are with this
Okay,
blissful day.
blissful day, February 2nd, where the temperatures are quite a bit milder than they have been. And we have, I think, a terrific show available for you today. And I urge everybody to participate and call in if they would like to, 640 3091. And because it is the first Wednesday of the month, I have my very good friend and amazing contributor to the state of New Hampshire, Lou D'Alessandro, with me, Senator,
Thank you.
representing, Goffstown and 3 wards of Manchester for the moment. And
Right.
that may
For the moment,
change.
It may change. It may change. Right.
And we have an outstanding guest joining us today, and that's the Commissioner of our New Hampshire Department of Transportation, Victoria Sheehan. And she has a fascinating story to tell about herself and about what's going on with the department.
Yes, she sure does.
And,
I think it's
So
wonderful.
thank you for coming down and joining us. We really, really appreciate it, Commissioner. And I'd like you to, as I suggested to you when we were getting ready here, that you might tell us a little bit about your own personal journey to be the commissioner of this very important agency in the state of New Hampshire.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here this evening. It's great to have this chance to talk with you. So yes, I'm originally from Ireland. I grew up in the north of Ireland, just outside of Belfast. At the age of 18, I went off to college. Actually, I went to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland and studied there. But while I was in college, I had the opportunity to apply for a Work America type program, and I was randomly placed at a summer camp in Meredith, New Hampshire. So that's what brought me to the state originally. I was supposed to work there for one summer, and then I told my parents I'd do some more vocational summer employment after that. But I actually worked 3 summers at the camp, made some great friends, and have a whole network now of folks that I can lean on. But I met my husband while working there. We got married. He was from New Hampshire. And so when I graduated with my master's, we got married and we ended up settling here. And it's strange to think I've lived now in New Hampshire as long as I lived in Ireland.
Really?
Yes.
And you have experience with our neighbors to the south, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, in the transportation field, don't you, too, as well?
Yes, so at the time that I had moved to the States, I just wanted to learn more about who the players were in the transportation space. And I thought the best way to learn who was who and also learn the American standards for construction was to work for a state Department of Transportation. And at that time, there wasn't many positions open in New Hampshire. We lived in Rochester at that time. And so I applied for a position with the Massachusetts Highway Department, as they were back then, and went to work out of the Arlington office in District 4. And I was just really lucky. I got to move up through the ranks. I started as an entry-level engineer and then left the department as a manager. But throughout my career in Massachusetts, I had lived in New Hampshire. And so back in 2015, when the position of commissioner was open, I was asked if I was interested in applying, and I was pleased to be nominated by then Governor Hassan and confirmed by the council. I served my first 4-year term and then was very grateful when Governor Sununu reappointed me. So I'm starting my 7th year now in New Hampshire as commissioner.
That's pretty good, you know.
it's terrific.
Be picked by governors of 2 different political parties to this very important position in our state government. I think that's a real compliment to your skills and your abilities to do this. What drew you into the issue of transportation?
So growing up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, as soon as there was any conflict at all, the first thing that happened is they'd stop the buses. And not having bus service meant that folks who were working in downtown Belfast couldn't easily get home. When there was conflict, many times roads were closed. And, from a very young age, I became acutely aware of the importance of transportation. The first time my parents let me ride my bike to the local store, that feeling of freedom and maturity that I was old enough to do that.
I kind of share that memory.
The first time I rode the bus by myself into the city, before I was old enough to have a driver's license, that when I think back, being able to go to the movie theater by myself or to go to, shopping with my friends, those were all opportunities that transportation provides you. And then, driving home after I passed my driving test, driving a car by myself, and that was a whole other world that was opened up. Now I could earn a living. I started, babysitting and doing jobs that, I wasn't relying on my parents to take me places.
Sure.
And so it was access to opportunity.
Yeah.
And so transportation has always been something that I'm passionate about. My dad sold construction equipment all my childhood as well. So I grew up going to construction projects. When I was very small, I used to go in to work with him occasionally on a Saturday morning. And at that time, all the construction workers were out on the road doing projects Monday to Friday. So Saturday mornings was when they came by to pay for the machines they'd purchased or pay for their rentals. And so I grew up around construction, but then I also had this passion for how important transportation is in terms of connecting people, not just to places, but most importantly to opportunity.
I don't know why I feel the need to say this, but I just will. I recently read a interesting historical account of the siege of Leningrad during World War II.
Oh, wow.
Which was besieged by the Germans invading Russia for 3 years.
Yeah.
And that city almost died, but they didn't. And when they knew they were going to survive is when the trams came back. The trams came back and were operating in the city of Leningrad after the German invasion that started in 1941 didn't end until sometime in 1944 when finally the Red Army, broke the siege. I don't know why I mentioned that, but I just felt I should, because you talk about the importance of transportation. That was such a dramatic thing. Commissioner, you've been commissioner how long?
6 years now. I
6
started
years.
in
You're in your
2015.
second term, right?
Second term.
Well, that's an outstanding career that you've had here. One of the things that we wanted to talk about, because we're facing it again this weekend, I guess, is the state's ability to respond to what we now need to realize is never going to happen again in New Hampshire, because with global warming we're going to have storms and freezing rain and all of that's coming up. Can you talk about how you organize your department to make sure New Hampshire people can get out and about?
Well, I am proud to be the commissioner of DOT because we have such a dedicated and committed workforce. Our folks do their best work in an emergency. And so when we do have inclement weather, whether it's a winter storm or some of those flash flooding events that we experience in the summer months, our staff will literally work around the clock until they clear the roads or rebuild the roads, depending on the severity of the event, and reconnect people with where they need to go. And every winter weather event is different. We talk about how no two storms are the same, whether it's the type of precipitation, the road temperature, the air temperature, the time of day when the storm hits. These are all different factors that we have to take into account as we determine the best treatment, the frequency of the treatment, and the storm that we had this past weekend, the light, fluffy snow, was certainly easier to clean up in some respects, but then we had high intensity with strong winds, so it was very difficult driving conditions. And so, how we perform in that storm is very different to how we're going to execute our operations with this upcoming storm.
Sure.
The weather that's forecast is going to start as rain in portions of the state tomorrow and then turn over to snow. And that's challenging for us because
And
especially when
maybe in the
it's
meantime, some
mixing.
sleet or freezing rain, the most dreaded of them all.
So when we have
Yeah.
every type of precipitation, that's certainly the most challenging.
Yeah,
but
for
our
sure.
guys, they are, they're committed. They will be out there when that first flake falls, and they don't go home until we have
Yeah.
everything cleaned up.
Everybody in New Hampshire, and not just in New Hampshire, is facing staffing shortages, whether it's our healthcare system or our restaurant industry. And you must be facing those challenges at the state DOT too, are you?
Of course.
You're able to find the help you need to man these people to do these vital jobs for us?
So like any agency or organization, we've been hit by the pandemic. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, people weren't driving as much, which meant that we weren't collecting as much revenue.
Right.
And, appropriately so, there was a hiring freeze implemented until we understood what our long-term revenues were going to be. And so we're working very closely with the governor and the legislature. Fortunately, we received some relief funding from the federal government, and then we got a lot of support through the budget process from the legislature. And so as soon as was possible, we lifted that hiring freeze and we started to recruit and fill positions. We did things a little bit differently. We tried to make sure that some of our newest employees were able to get their CDL driving license quicker than we usually would expect them to. Normally we give people...
Does that help a lot?
That does. Normally we give people about 12 months to get their CDL license, but we ended up contracting with some of the CDL driving schools. There's one in New Hampshire and one in Massachusetts that we're using. So that concept of contracting was supported by the governor and the executive council. And so we've been able to get people through the permit and licensing process quicker. And of course, those individuals still have to learn how to plow and perform during a winter storm. Right. But they're now part of the rotation. They're contributing. And certainly in the second half of the winter season, if we have an extended season and folks are getting more tired and burnt out, they'll be there to help. And then of course, across the department, we have people who have CDL licenses. So typically it's our highway maintainers that plow the roadways.
And CDL is what?
The commercial driver's license.
Sure, thank you.
So normally it's our highway maintainers that take care of the roads during winter storms.
Yeah.
And we've always had some volunteers from across other bureaus that pitch in. But this year we've been really trying to have a driver for every truck, and so we've had countless people who have a commercial driver's license and work in another area, whether it's bridge maintenance, traffic, materials and research. These folks have been stepping up and volunteering to work during winter storms.
That's
so
really
certainly
encouraging.
we have vacancies, but we've been able to look across the department, recruit those additional volunteers, and I think our performance has been equivalent to previous seasons.
Yeah, I think your performance has truly been outstanding. Now we had this one storm, but I was out on the roads quickly, and the roads were great. And New Hampshire, black roads, clean roads, great pavement. That's what we're famous for. And I think every DOT commissioner that I've dealt with, and I've dealt with a lot of them in the last 50 years, that was the mantra. And New Hampshire's been famous for that, truly. And certainly...
God, I remember back to the great storm of 1978 when Mike Dukakis was governor of Massachusetts, and that whole state was shut down.
Right.
And New Hampshire never did, although you couldn't go to Massachusetts.
Yeah, we kept going. But I think we do an outstanding job. And I did notice that most of the vehicles that I saw were our vehicles. And I was surprised by that, because I know we usually rent or we hire people, but I saw almost everybody I saw was the orange trucks. I was very pleased with that.
Well, I do want to give a shout out to the hired trucks, the contractors that work with our teams, because they are very much a part of the team.
Right. How much of what percentage of your response are hired trucks as opposed to your own?
So it depends on the region of the state. So you can imagine in the northern part of the state or the higher elevations where we get more routine winter weather, we use a lot more of our own equipment and our own people. But as you move south, winters are unpredictable. Year to year, we can have a different number of storms, a different number
always
of
like Manchester's
inches.
right on the edge between, freezing rain, snow, whatever.
So we use a lot more contractors in central and southern New Hampshire just because of the nature of the winter. It's less certain how much weather we're going to see.
How do you relate, like here in Manchester, we have our own, of course, our Public Works Department. Kevin Shepherd is the head of it. And how do you relate with them? How do you decide? Obviously we know there's certain places where the state maintenance and then becomes city maintenance, but does there need to be additional coordination to deal with winter storms like we're about to face and did face?
Yeah, so we do collaborate and work closely with our counterparts in Public Works, and of course we also work closely with State Police and the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Before every storm, significant storm, we have calls to share the latest weather information and talk about how we're preparing as a state DOT, and then also understanding what challenges the public works departments might face. And of course, it's a little different treating, an interstate versus a lower volume roadway.
Right.
So sometimes we're using different techniques just because of the amount of traffic.
Sure.
But we certainly share all the lessons learned. Here in New Hampshire, we've done a lot to try and reduce our salt usage as a
Yes.
way of protecting the environment.
That's
and
right.
so,
Yep.
as an example, we use brine for
Right.
pre-treating our roadways,
Right.
and we make the brine that
You
we
do that statewide?
not statewide, but certainly in southern New Hampshire. The nature of a lot of the storms we get here, it's well suited to brine, and we've had a history of chloride issues, high salt levels, especially along the 93 corridor. So we're very committed to doing everything we can to reduce the amount of salt, recognizing that public safety does come first. So it's always that balancing act.
It's a balancing act, yeah, absolutely.
Protecting public safety, but doing what we can to minimize the impact of our operations. So, we share what we're doing with the cities and towns, and there's what's called the Green Snow Pro program that some of the municipalities have participated in. So they too are hiring contractors who've been trained and know how to deploy these same techniques.
Right.
So there's a lot of
What do you
sharing.
use for your? I imagine the weather forecast is really important to you doing your job in this.
Yeah.
What do you use for your resources to get the best possible weather forecast that you can?
So we, of course, work with Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and through them, we get access to the National Weather Service, and so we're getting forecasting information from them. But out on our highways, we actually have what we call RWISS, they're Road Weather Information System stations, and so we have access to that data for New Hampshire, but we also have access to the data for neighboring states. So we can see how pavement temperature is changing. We can see the amount of precipitation in other areas. And then we'll actually get alerts on our phones. Our maintenance folks will see what's happening nearby, and then they'll know to be ready to get in and be ready the moment the storm starts in our part of the state.
You mentioned brine, which is something that's in my many years somewhat relatively new. And I see oftentimes Manchester, the public works people will put down brine when there's a
Right.
prediction of
We're
snow.
doing it.
Do you do that around the state as well?
Yeah, depending on the type of storm, like I said, if we've had a few days of really cold weather and the pavement
Do we have?
is at a very low temperature, then brine might not be the best
Really?
choice.
What's the temperature range when brine is effective?
Usually we want to be in the 20s.
Yeah.
If we're anything below that and we are getting a dry, cold snowstorm, then we like to keep the road actually very dry. The last thing you want to do is turn it to liquid.
Right.
We want the snow to literally
'Cause it
blow
might
off
freeze,
the road.
or-
So
yeah.
it's always a balancing act to figure out exactly what the forecast is and then what the right treatment might be given the type of storm that we're expecting. If we're going to get a heavy wet snow, then we're always concerned about that first layer
Yes.
adhering to the roadway. So that's why we use brine for that pre-treatment.
Yeah.
So it really does depend on the specifics of the storm.
So what's the storm coming up, tomorrow and Friday?
This
look
one's
like?
going to be hard because it's going to start as rain in the southern part of the state. It'll almost be easier to treat in the northern region where it
Right.
stays as snow.
Snow is not as bad as.
But yes, residual salt or brine that you would put down when we're going to get rain tomorrow will all wash away
Right.
before it turns over to snow. So these are the types of events that are
Sure.
much more challenging to predict. We're watching the forecast closely, but exactly where is that rain-snow line going to be?
Yeah.
How quickly will it turn over?
Yeah.
That's why we really stress the traveling public, please stay off the roads if you can.
Yes.
Um,
Right,
And
sure.
they respond.
And
Oh,
they
yeah.
do. We really are grateful that the public is so responsive to those messages. And thank you to everybody in the media who's pushing the message on our behalf so that folks know what to expect. And then, during the storm, we always caution people, don't just think about the weather where you are, but think about your destination, where
Yeah,
you're driving
right,
to.
right.
Sure.
If you're going up north to ski for the weekend, pay attention to that
Right.
forecast and just allow yourself plenty of time.
Right, sure.
Your
You
normal
it
trip
was not
duration.
that long ago. It wasn't this last storm, Lou, but the one before where we had a bit of freezing rain in the morning.
Oh,
it was
yes.
the worst driving conditions I
Yes,
can
yeah.
remember in years and years and years. And it must have been just an unbelievably
Oh, it
nasty
was.
combination of events.
Oh, no kidding. I was on my way to the State House, and I just got beyond the hooks of tolls, and right away it froze, and I mean froze.
I hope you pulled over
I
and
saw the
didn't
windshield.
continue to travel.
Well, I went slowly. Believe me, I went slowly.
Yeah.
But it was amazing to me how quick that transition took place.
It can happen.
And that was really icy.
That must be the toughest situation you face, right?
Oh, by far, those
Yes.
mornings can be the hardest. And we can be out there and we can treat the roads early. But if there's no traffic to break down the salt and work
right.
it in, then you're still going to
Oh, I
have...
never thought of that. That's a
You're
good
going to have
point.
spots that are still icy,
Sure.
even
Yeah.
though we have made our first pass of the day.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then if the temperatures drop suddenly or the precipitation comes in like it did that morning, it's a very
Yes.
fine mist. It was barely even raining. 1 minute you're driving
Oh,
at
yeah,
60 and
excuse
everything
me,
is
yeah,
fine.
it was
Yeah.
wicked.
And the next minute you're on the
Bang.
interstate and
And-
it instantly freezes. So
and
those are
you're
the
freezing.
most challenging
Those are
mornings,
very
certainly.
demanding. I
Yeah,
mean,
it was
I
some-
guess there's nothing, that human ingenuity can do to deal with that except
Yeah.
wait it out till something changes.
Well, there's for some reason, and Commissioner, you've been around long enough to know this one, 89 becomes perilous at that time. And I have...
It's because of the elevation.
There's more accidents on 89 than any other road in the state. And you're right about the elevations, because it does move this way when you're going north up to the Hanover and to White River Junction where it is. But the number of accidents on 89 and how we deal with them, that's got to be a real challenge.
Well, certainly there's corridors like 89, US 4 is another one where you have a lot of changes in just the topography of the
Right,
land.
yes, yes.
And so depending on the nature of the weather and how it
Yeah.
sits either in the valleys or on the higher elevations, that's why we ask people to think about where you're driving to, not just the
Sure.
conditions where you leave from, because you
Yeah,
can drive
yeah,
through
yeah,
different
yeah,
weather,
yeah.
and we really need you to drive for those conditions.
Yeah.
Because certainly we're monitoring what we know to be the trouble spots, but I can't stress enough how each storm, each event can be different based on the nature of the weather that we get.
Yeah. Well, folks, we normally take a couple of breaks here in the progress report. I think we'll take one now, but I would urge you, if you have a question or a comment for our guest, and we're very proud to have the Commissioner of the Department of Transportation with us tonight, and it's been fascinating to me, at least, to hear what she has to say. And we'll be right back, but you can call in at 603-640-3091. And we come back, I think we'll talk about some other issues than just the storm response as we get into the winter of this 2022 on Groundhog's Day.
We'll talk about the financial situation.
The financial situation of the department and some long-range transportation issues that I'm sure the Commissioner has been thinking about a lot. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. This is the progress report for this, the 2nd of February, Groundhog Day, folks. Groundhog Day. I sent out Groundhog cards. How many of you did that? But it is Groundhog Day, and the guy says we're going to have 6 more weeks of winter. Seems to be that's the case every. But I understand we have a call. If we do, I'd like to take our call and welcome to our show. Hey, caller, you with us?
Just say hello. Nope, just say hello. Don't hang it up.
Hello? Caller, you with us? I'm not hearing anybody, Brendan.
All right, try to pick it up again.
Okay, let me try it. Hey, caller, you on the show? Hello?
Hello.
Hi there. Welcome to the Progress Report. Glad we got you. If you have a question or comment, we're happy to...
Bob, listen carefully. Could you take my phone number down, I'll give you my name, and you can call me after the show. I want to talk to you about something very important.
Okay, but I'd like you to participate in the show if you want to.
Yes, I'm very interested in that, in your Department of Transportation.
Yeah,
Because it's important.
it is. Okay.
And I hope that we have some kind of a rail service someday.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're not going to ignore that, caller.
Okay? Could you take my number down?
Sure.
I'll give you my name. My name is Bob Berthiaume.
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 Berthiaume, okay.
My
Okay.
number is area code 603.
Yeah. Got it, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for calling. All right. Well, there you go.
Hey,
But he moved us in a direction I was hoping to go
Every
with
day
you,
is different.
Commissioner, which is to look at beyond the storm response, which I think the state has continued a tradition of excellence, as Lou does. And I thank you for your part in making that happen. To looking at some of the longer term issues that we face with transportation here in New Hampshire. I know New Hampshire, transportation in New Hampshire is a huge issue for a lot of people. You know, we don't have the extensive public transportation network around the state that other states do, more urban states than us. And I know it's a major issue as people get older, and I'm beginning to realize what that means, and think about their own mobility and, how are they going to get around when they don't feel like driving and all that. Would you want to talk a little bit about, the department's long-term planning about, where the transportation system as the future goes, particularly with an aging population, which, alas, is happening?
So every 2 years in New Hampshire, we update our 10-year transportation plan. And that process, it starts with the regional planning commissions, who work really closely with all of the municipalities to understand what their transportation priorities are. And then we really kick things off in earnest when we start in the first phase with what's called GASSET, the Governor's Advisory Committee on Intermodal Transportation. And what is GASSET? Well, GASSET's a body, it's the 5 executive councillors with the Commissioner for DOT. And we talk about the available revenue for transportation, whether that's federal funds, state funds, or turnpike revenues. And then together we establish what the priorities should be and draft the first version of the 10-year plan. And we actually take that document out on the road. This fall was the public hearing phase of the GASSET process. And so there was 22 public meetings. Many of them were in person or hybrid to give people more opportunities to participate. And we had one fully virtual hearing. And then at the conclusion of that process, we work with the councillors. They modify the plan. It then goes to the governor. He makes changes as he deems necessary. And then it goes to the legislature and becomes a piece of legislation. So this year, the 10-year plan is HB 2022. It's always the calendar year that we're in.
When is the next 10-year plan due to go into effect?
So we're in the House phase right now because this is a bill. It'll be signed into law, around June timeframe. And then actually we start all over again. We start with the regional planning commissions working on the next update. And so, of course, this time around, not only did we have this public engagement phase, we had a lot of uncertainty when we started working with the council as to what was going to be available in federal revenue. But then the timing was really ideal with the passage of the new infrastructure bill, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the administration's calling it the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So you'll hear it called either the IIJA or the bill. The passage of that bill and the timing was really ideal for us because we were able to take all the comments we'd received from the public process. We now knew what our federal funding was going to be and adjust the plan after working with each of the councillors one-on-one. And so, certainly through our 10-year plan process, when we go out and we talk to constituents, we hear comments and we try to group them into themes. So certainly asking for more travel options was something that we heard over and over again, whether that's expanding local bus service, asking that we invest more in walking and biking and rail trails. I think during the pandemic we saw a real increase in the number of folks that wanted to get outside.
Oh, we sure did.
And we call it active transportation, sort of healthy transportation.
Yeah, it certainly is.
So a lot of advocacy for better walking and biking facilities. And then, safety is probably the next highest priority for everyone. And that's certainly something that we as a department, of course, are focused on. Preservation of our existing system. Tragically, we saw a bridge collapse in Pittsburgh just last week. And so, all of us in the DOT space are committed to making sure that all of our infrastructure is safe for the traveling public. And then, of course, other themes that we hear are, congestion reduction, as well as concerns around resiliency and making sure that our infrastructure can withstand some of the storms, especially along the seacoast that we've been experiencing. Right. So these are all the things that we hear. And you talked about public transportation. Certainly we're a rural state. We don't have the frequency of service that perhaps you have elsewhere in the country. But our transit providers do a phenomenal job with the resources that they do have. Whether it's Manchester Transit here in the city, or Nashua Transit to the south, Coast over in the seacoast, they're working every day to provide both a fixed route service for those that rely on it, but then also to do the demand response service for seniors and individuals with disabilities. And our rural transit providers, meanwhile, are working just as hard to meet all of those needs as well. And we have a huge volunteer driver program as well across the state. Many of the communities are served by volunteer drivers who help get people to medical appointments and essential appointments each and every day. And so
you're recruiting people to be part of that?
Certainly. We talked about the shortage of commercial drivers, individuals with a commercial driver's license. So, there's lots of opportunities in the transportation space, not just working for a DOT or working for a construction company or a trucking company. We need transit bus drivers, school bus drivers, as well as those who are willing to volunteer and help seniors and individuals with disabilities. And so there really is a network of folks that are helping meet the needs. We have what's called our state coordinating council that tries to align the efforts of all of the rural transit providers. But certainly, we hear of increasing need.
Yes. I hear that all the time.
And, we certainly saw some additional federal funding flowing into the state through this new infrastructure bill. But fortunately, we also got a significant amount of relief funding through the CARES Act. Was the first bill. There was then CRISA, and then most recently the American Rescue Plan. So those dollars have certainly helped sustain our transit providers during the pandemic.
Yeah. Good.
And they did. Our transit providers needed a boost. That bus service between Concord and Boston really needed a boost. I think we came up with $7 million of CARES money to keep that thing going, because the mitigation deal that we were part of had to be fulfilled.
Yeah, so our in-state transit providers did receive funding either through New Hampshire DOT or directly from the federal government. But in addition to that, we did work through GOFR, the governor's office for economic relief and recovery, to secure some additional dollars for the private bus companies that provide some of the critical commuter and intercity service down to the Boston area. There's a lot of individuals who live in New Hampshire and work in Massachusetts who rely on those services as well. So really we're trying to sustain the entire transportation sector through the peak of the pandemic because of how critical it is that they be able to offer their service into the future when we all get through this period.
So what is the efforts the Biden administration has done with the bill that they did get passed with some bipartisan support, not overwhelmingly, with some? What has that enabled you to do, and what would be able to you do if they could get this bill back better funding?
So our traditional federal funding, what's called surface transportation, the last bill was called the FAST Act. It actually was expiring. The FAST Act was scheduled to expire in 2020. It was extended for 1 year, so it was expiring in 2021. And so as there was this discussion about a large-scale infrastructure bill, As far as transportation was concerned, we needed a new piece of legislation passed. Otherwise, all of our funding would have stopped.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of concern within the industry. Any interruption in funding for transportation, that brings uncertainty for everyone involved, whether it is our transit providers or our construction partners who are, hindered then in their ability to bid and procure work. And so we'd been advocating very strongly that they pass a bill on time. In the end, it was the end of the calendar year. We had a few months of a continuing resolution, but fortunately the bill was passed. So this is not all new money where transportation is concerned. When we had developed the last 10-year plan, we had assumed level funding at the end of the FAST Act. And so certainly this bill provides additional funding for transportation. And we're getting approximately $1.5 billion over a 5-year period for transportation investment. But it's not all new money in that we had really already budgeted about $1 billion of that through previous 10-year plans with that assumption of level federal funding into the future. So what are we getting that's new funds? Well, it's about a 24% increase in our traditional road and bridge categories. And then we got a dedicated amount for bridge infrastructure specifically. It's around $225 million. And then there were increases for public transportation and for airports as well. So this is, certainly much appreciated, but what we're doing with these funds is we're really trying to accelerate existing priorities in the 10-year plan. These bills that Congress passes, typically they're around a 5-year window. We have a 10-year plan, so with these additional dollars, we're just trying to advance a lot of the work and do it sooner. And with the dedicated bridge money, as an example, we're funding bridge work that we were already planning to do with those dedicated dollars. But what that does mean is we can free up the more flexible categories of money and use it for other things. So there's a lot of projects that we had that were very scope constrained. Corridor improvements, where maybe we're just looking at one intersection at a time, and we're going to have the work phased over many years. Now we're able to expand the scope and do more work sooner.
Yeah.
And so we're using that 10-year plan process really to identify what projects are good candidates to move up, recognizing that project readiness is important, right?
Sure,
Some
absolutely.
projects have a more involved environmental permitting, or there's right-of-way and land that we have to acquire to build the project. So not every project can be done sooner, but those that are good candidates, we're trying to move them up and bring results just faster for everyone.
Well, I think shovel-ready projects, that was the desire of the administration. Let's get these projects out. Let's get these projects done.
Yeah, jobs.
Particularly as it relates to the bridges. Now, bridges have become a very significant part of the plan. And how many red line bridges do we have? About 326 in New Hampshire?
Between municipal and state-owned, I think there's that's where people get confused because we show different numbers in different contexts. But so that's the good thing about these funds is we're not only going to be accelerating state DOT projects, we're going to be pledging money to accelerate the work on municipal-owned bridges as well, because there's a significant need to support
no question.
the locally owned infrastructure as well as the state assets.
Well, and this...
Lou, I remember, as you do, when we had the great road building project in this country, it was like the Roman Empire.
Absolutely.
It was called the Eisenhower Interstate System.
Eisenhower Interstate
It
System.
transformed our country and our state.
It sure did.
We're essentially not building more roads anymore, are we? Is that an overstatement? What is now the priority for the funds that are available? Not building new highways, but what?
Well, for many years, as state DOTs have become more sophisticated in what we call our asset management systems, we've been making the case that we really have to maintain the existing infrastructure and only build new when we have the resources to do so.
Sure.
We don't want to keep building new things if we don't have the manpower or the financial resources to keep them in a good state of repair.
Yeah.
Because it's just as important to provide a safe, reliable system as to meet additional capacity needs. So for many, many years now, it's been that balancing act of trying to preserve what you have and then add capacity when it's really warranted.
Let me give you a specific example I was involved with many years ago as a lawyer. The rebuilding of Highway 101 from Manchester to Keene. And there was these huge, epic battles between Dublin and Harrisville.
Right.
Dublin wanted to go to Harrisville, and Harrisville didn't want to go there. And is there? So what's happening with that kind of situation now? Is there still any talk about rebuilding 101 in a new corridor or not? Is that just done?
So that project is not currently in our 10-year plan. We do intend to do some improvements along the 101 corridor, but that's more between sort of Bedford and Wilton, that section of 101.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we want to protect and preserve the character of our state. And so we're very proud of our public outreach process as a department. When we are entertaining a project, we go out and we meet often with the community to really understand what it is that they're looking for in terms of a solution. And we want to see the state thrive. We're in the transportation business, as I said earlier, to provide connections to between people and places, as well as access to opportunity and economic development. And so when we're sitting down with communities, we're talking about the type of development that they're anticipating. What is the industry? Is it retail? Is it higher ed? Is it manufacturing? Because the transportation needs can be completely different depending on the sector of growth that you're expecting.
Yeah.
And so it's really all about listening to the community and building out the infrastructure to meet their needs.
Right.
It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
No.
Here in New Hampshire, we're all about listening to municipalities and trying to work with them to understand how to best solve their problems.
So this is what I really like to do. I ask you to talk about, what do you think the vision for the future is for transportation modalities, in this area, but particularly in New Hampshire? Is the time coming we're going to have other transportation modalities? And in the course of this, you want to talk about commuter rail, one of my favorite topics. I'd love to hear you do that.
So I'll talk about commuter rail first of all, because that is an active project that the department's working on. So we are currently advancing what's called the project development phase of the Capital Corridor passenger rail service. So what is the Capital Corridor? It's the existing rail line between Boston and Concord. And back in 2014, the department had undertaken a feasibility study looking at different options. But what was deemed the most feasible at that time was to provide a commuter level of frequency of service between Manchester and Boston. Of course, it's an existing commuter line that goes up to Lowell, so really we're just extending the rail line from
right
Lowell
on the border.
up to Manchester. And so there's been a lot of debate over the years as to whether or not this is a project the state really should embark upon.
Yes.
So that is why the department has advocated for what's called the project development phase. So this is funded by the Federal Transit Administration. So yes, it's a rail project, but because we're talking about a commuter type service, it's a project that's funded by the Federal Transit Administration with some of the urbanized area money that we receive from them. And what we're doing is working to identify where all the stations would be located exactly, working with the MBTA, who would be our partners and the operators of this rail line, to understand exactly what the design criteria are, working with the City of Manchester to find a site for the layover facility for the trains. And once we have all of that, we'll be able to actually come up with true construction costs and true operating costs. And then most importantly, we'll sit down and do a financial plan to look at all the ways that you could fund a rail project.
I think that may have prompted a call. Hello, caller. Welcome to the Progress Report.
I have a question about the rail system.
Yes?
You're going to bring some trains up here, is that correct?
Yes? Go right ahead. What's your question? You might want to turn.
I heard that the.
You might want to turn your TV down. We got a 10-second delay here.
Diesel,
Pardon me?
and that's a lot of pollution. It's all stuff coming out from Massachusetts.
You're worried about the pollution from the diesel engines? Have I got that right? You got to turn your TV down. We got a 10-second delay. It gets confusing.
Yes, there should be electric cars.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
okay, all right. Thank you for the call.
Well, the mention of electric vehicles, that's a good segue.
Yes.
So, of
It
course,
is indeed.
we're going to complete this this phase of the project, and at the end we'll have a financial plan with options as to how you could fund both the construction as well as the operating expenses associated with the rail line. And most importantly, from the department's perspective, we'll have the numbers to present to the legislature and to decision makers, so that once and for all, we as a state can decide, is this the right thing to do and should we move forward, or is this not something that we should entertain? Because as a department, it's been challenging without real concrete data to present. There's a lot of different opinions out there. So our goal is to provide the information so that folks can make an informed decision. But the caller mentioned electric vehicles. So certainly we're seeing an increase in the number of both hybrid and electric vehicles out on our roadways. New Hampshire is a big travel and tourism state. It's a huge part of our economy. And so we want to make sure that we stay competitive. And so the state has been working, many of the state agencies have been working collaboratively. We benefited from a settlement with Volkswagen after the emission scandal. So the state received funding. Some of that money has been made available for electric charging infrastructure. And then in the most recent transportation bill or infrastructure bill, there also was money made available for states to install electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So New Hampshire will receive a little over $17 million over 5 years. There's also some discretionary grant programs we can apply to access additional dollars. So we're getting to work already with our colleagues from the Department of Environmental Services and talking with the governor's office about how we can develop the plans to most effectively use those dollars. So we certainly are preparing in that area. And the state had an EV charging commission that did work that informed how to best utilize the EV related components of the VW settlement. And then beside that, we also have another body, the Transportation Council, that is tasked with supporting and advising the department as we prepare for all new technologies in the transportation space. So, of course, we have a very robust transportation management center. I mentioned earlier we have the road and weather stations out on the highway, but we also have cameras so that we can monitor the highways, and when there is crashes, quickly respond with our partners in law enforcement and other first responders to react to those crashes and make sure that scenes are cleared quickly. And there's a lot of technology that we've been deploying, whether it's the dynamic message signs that can warn folks that there's a crash ahead, or tell you that there's inclement weather. So we've dropped the speed limit on the highways to 45 miles per hour. So there's infrastructure that we've been building out, and some of that backbone infrastructure, the communications piece, will prepare us well for the connected and automated technologies that are coming in the future as well. So there's a lot of potential changes on the horizon.
Oh, I think so.
Over the Christmas holiday, my daughter drove up here from her home in Virginia with her husband and my grandson in their brand new Tesla. And they were going to go up to ski in the White Mountains, which I thought was a fine idea. And they discovered that they thought the last charging station they could use was in Ashland. And I guess it turns out there was actually one in Lincoln. And I said, well, why can't you charge up in Manchester? Well, it turns out there are charging stations in Manchester, but they're not Tesla. And I was just astounded by this, Can you imagine if you bought a Volkswagen, you charge up at a station and offered Volkswagen, nozzles or, or General Motors?
Sure.
That's where we are with electric.
Yeah, well.
I mean, how can this happen? And can we get a universal charging station as part of this infrastructure? It'd be like having the railroads all having different gauges, wouldn't it?
So these are some of the policy items that are being discussed both at the federal level and the state level. It's well known that most of the other EV car manufacturers are using one charging connection point, and Tesla's using a different one. But there is plans to try and standardize the industry.
It's got to happen.
Yeah. But the fleet, has not turned over as quickly as some had maybe forecast, and so now with additional investment and more states setting targets and goals around increasing EV deployment, these issues are really bubbling to the top.
Sure.
And we're hoping that standardization is something that will be resolved so that we have the coverage that we need.
Sure, but when we look at these progressive things, we look at how we have funded our highway system in the past, and that's dissipating.
That's dissipating.
It's dissipating. So we've got to come up with other methodologies, and I think.
And I know the legislature's been wrestling with this.
Non-major has been wrestling with
Yeah,
this
non-major has.
for a number of years.
And
his
a lot of
mileage
people were not
situation.
happy with his solution. He's a
They
distinguished
weren't
state
happy with it.
representative from Plastow and
they were
very
not
active on
happy.
transportation.
They were not
And that's
happy.
the other thing I kind of wanted to get you to talk about. You know, the department's been very dependent upon what they call the roll tolls, which most people call just the gas tax
Right.
in New Hampshire. And when people are going more and more to electric or hybrids and more actually all electric, like my daughter and her family just did, you know, there's not that revenue. What's the department going to do to deal with that?
So it is a little confusing here in New Hampshire. We have both a turnpike system, and so you pay tolls on the turnpike,
Right.
but then we call what people think of as the gas tax the road toll,
Toll.
to really reflect that it is more of a user fee,
Yes.
and that you're paying a portion.
Could we go to more road tolls?
Well, so
Merrimack wouldn't like to hear that.
I don't envy the legislature. This has been debated, within the State House, but then also at the federal level for quite some time. Yes, there's a lot more hybrid and electric vehicles on the road today, but every vehicle is much more fuel efficient than it
Yes,
once was.
sure.
Certainly is.
And so, yes, we've seen declining revenues. But at the state level and at the federal level, lawmakers have made the choice to put general funds into the highway fund. And fortunately, here in New Hampshire, our economy has been thriving, and we've
Yes.
had
They put
surplus.
more general funds into the highway fund?
Yep, there's been
Yes.
some items. For example, when there was additional general fund revenue at the end of one of the budget cycles, we had been making the case for additional investment in bridge infrastructure, and we received a significant amount of money
Right.
to address more redless
Sure.
bridges. And so, I'm just, as commissioner, in the position where we're telling the story of what our needs are. And then we really look to the legislature to determine
To
the most
address them.
appropriate way to fund those needs. And we've received a lot of support over my time as commissioner, getting what we need to perform the most critical aspects of our work.
Well,
And certainly these additional federal dollars will be helpful,
Right.
but there's certain roads that don't qualify for federal
Right.
dollars. So it's a constant,
It's a constant struggle.
well, so I was going to say, it's a constant conversation with the legislature
yeah, that's
about
it.
of all the different revenue sources, how best to pay for
Sure. And
the
that's
improvements that are
that's
needed.
the struggle. And we've tried over and over again. We increased the registration fee. That was one way to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
That was rescinded. This time we appropriated $50 million in general funds for DOT.
Why don't we just charge the heavier vehicles more? They do the most damage to the highways, don't
They
they?
certainly do.
Why don't we just do
Well,
that?
and haven't we increased the load limit? It's 100,000 pounds now, isn't it?
Yeah. I think in this climate, you're seeing how, the shortage of commercial drivers and supply chain issues are driving up the cost of goods for everyone.
Sure.
And so, like I said before, I don't envy our legislature. Everything is a balancing act.
That's
And
true.
we just try to provide them with the information they need to make the best possible decision. And when we have a booming economy, like I said, and a surplus of general funds, if that's an appropriate way to fund transportation, many states generate revenue from a whole suite of different
Sure.
options
Yeah.
to pay for transportation investments. So each state has to do what works
Right.
with your economy and the nuances of
Right.
how your budget is structured.
Yeah, I think our problem is we decide there's one way, and then we turn that down, we repeal it, and we go back the other way. I think consistency is very important, and I came to state government when the Public Works and Highways was the name of the organization. It wasn't
remember
DOT. And the Public Works and Highways ran the roads. They ran the show, and they were players, real players in the process. I think that's dissipated over the years, obviously, and other players have come in, other entities have come into play, but coming to the realization that you're going to have to pay for these services, I think that's got to strike home one of these days. You can't run toll roads without tolls. You just can't do it, right? You can't do it, and you can't keep improving toll roads without the revenue from the tolls. And there is this misnomer in the state about these credits. We credits. and then they scream, "Oh, we're going to spend all of these credits that we've built. We use these credits instead of cash."
Yeah.
And
Pretty nifty.
How many millions of dollars of toll credits do we have built up?
So let me explain first of all what a toll credit is.
Yes.
But I just want to say again, we really work hard to stretch the value of the dollars that we receive.
I
And
understand
at the
that.
beginning of this conversation, you talked about the pride that we have in the condition of our
Yes,
roadways here in
absolutely.
New Hampshire.
Yep.
Yes, we do.
And despite receiving the least in federal funding by formula, we still have roads that many of our neighbors would be envious of.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I think that's not just a testament to the work of the DOT. Of course, it's my job to talk about
Sure.
our accomplishments, but also our partners, the consultants and the contractors that we work with, who really do strive to give us a quality product
Right.
and a product that will last.
Yeah.
And so it's really the entire industry coming together that
Right.
has led to the longevity of
Sure.
the infrastructure that we have constructed.
Yeah, and I mean, I couldn't agree with that more. And
But
I- and
so
I've been-
getting
I've
back to
been-
the toll credits, so our turnpike system actually predates the national highway system that was
That's
laid
right.
out.
That's right. That's
And
true.
so when we do collect revenue on our turnpike and then spend money keeping that infrastructure in a good state of repair, the federal government gives us credit for doing that because
Right.
we're choosing to generate our own cash and invest in that infrastructure, not draw on federal funds to maintain it. And so we accrue these credits, but they
Right.
have zero value.
Right.
They're just a way to access federal funds.
Right.
And so I spent a lot of time before the legislature explaining this concept. But basically, if the federal government gives you $80, then we have to provide $20 of cash match to access that.
Yeah.
So you spend $100. We in New Hampshire use toll credits to match all of the federal funds that we use on DOT-led projects. So if we receive $80 of federal funds, we will use $20 of toll credits to access that federal money. But the credits have zero value. So instead of it being 80 plus 20, you spend 100,
It's 80.
we just spend 80 because
Sure.
we spent 20 to
That's
access
Cool.
it.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's
that's-
a
that's-
terrific thing for us to have these toll
Kind of reminds
credits.
me of Metascale
Right,
back in the
right.
day.
Well, at the end of the federal fiscal year, sometimes there's money left over that wasn't obligated. And so they make additional money available to the states through a process called redistribution. As commissioner, I don't have to go back to the legislature and ask for additional state funds to access those dollars. I can apply for redistribution knowing I have the toll credits to be able to access
Right.
that money.
Yeah.
Whereas other states aren't in that fortunate position. They've got to go and ask for the match to be able to
Right.
get the additional dollars. Likewise, some of the grant programs that we can apply for, I can use toll credits for match, which also means, again, I'm having to go through a lengthy legislative
Right,
process to secure those dollars. So there is definitely benefits to having toll
Well,
credits.
I think the wizardry of the manipulation is something to marvel at. To be honest with you, and we've been doing this wizardry for a long period of time. But I'm just stating, Commissioner, and I think the world of you. There's come a time when you have to come up with the money.
Oh, we always have more tricks up our sleeve. We'll find a way to pay for the work that needs to be done.
I'm sure you will, but you got to pay the piper one of these days. I mean, we have to, and by that I mean the state. And it's just I see it coming. And look I see the widening of roads being essential, and I see $150 million bills. And where's that going to come from?
Yeah.
An increase in the tolls, and hey,
that
that isn't coming.
Lou, we're at the
Yep.
end here. We didn't even get something I wanted to talk to the commissioner about, which he mentioned to me, and that is the issue of safety on our roads. And
Oh, yes.
we're going to have you back, I think, Commissioner. I hope you consider that sometime in the future. It's been wonderful to have you here as our guest, and you've provided a lot of terrific information. I want to talk to you about safety. I wanted to talk to you about your, maybe long-term vision of what the future of transportation looks like, but it looks like we're just about out of time. And this hour goes by very fast. I can't thank you
Like
so
magic,
much
like
for
magic.
being here with us. We're really lucky to have people like you
Thank you.
leading a major department here in New Hampshire.
Well, thank you again for the invitation. Certainly, I'll come back and talk safety anytime. It's something I'm extremely passionate about.
And I think
love
we
to
should
have
give
you.
you that opportunity. So we
For
will
sure.
count on doing that. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, that's it for me. I'll be Lou and the commissioner. I'll be back next week with Mike Farley with another edition of the Progress Report.